My name is Bonnie Stabile, and I serve as Associate Professor and Director of the Gender and Policy Center here at the Schar School of Policy and Government. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm really proud to convene this webinar as part of a continuing dialogue on the implications of disparities in the representation of women and other underrepresented groups in the public sphere. Data science is a form of power, as Catherine D'Ignazio and her co-author Lauren Klein assert in their book, Data Feminism. Today, we'll discuss the policy implications of this power to advance justice or entrench discrimination, and how more gender expansive thinking can usefully challenge and shape how data is collected and employed going forward for the good of all. To get us started, I'd like to introduce Schar School Dean Mark Rozelle.
Great, thank you, Bonnie. Thank everybody for attending. I'm very pleased to welcome you here this afternoon for another timely discussion and really an all-star panel sponsored by our Schar School's Gender and Policy Center here at George Mason University. Catherine D'Ignazio is Assistant Professor of Urban Science and Planning in the Department of Urban Studies and Planning at MIT. Her book, Data Feminism, joins a distinguished series of works highlighted by the Gender and Policy Center, including 23rd Air Force Secretary Deborah Lee James's book, Aim High, and Lucinda Robb and Becca Roberts' text, The Suffragist Playbook. We're honored to be joined here today by repeat Schar panelist Representative Don Beyer, who among his many other accomplishments is co-sponsor of the Algorithmic Accountability Act and a longtime champion of women's leadership, as evidenced by the annual conference he has sponsored on the topic for 5 years running right here on the Schar School campus in Arlington. It is also an honor to be joined by Shift 7 founder and CEO, Megan Smith, who served as the first female chief technology officer of the United States and advisor to the president from 2014 to 2017, and as a vice president at Google for over a decade, where she led new business development, including acquisitions of Google Earth and Maps. Shemana Hartstock, who I am happy to say sits on the Schar Gender and Policy Center Advisory Board, was the founder and CEO of Phone to Action, a startup providing software that is used with public policy advocacy campaigns. She earlier held a cabinet level position with former District of Columbia Mayor Adrian Fenty, and is now working on a venture to help underrepresented students across tech apprenticeships tech apprenticeships and mentorships. So I look forward to hearing the thoughts of the panel on this very timely policy topic. And now I turn you back over to the Gender and Policy Center Director, Bonnie Stabile, to get the conversation started. Bonnie?
Thanks, Mark. Thanks to Dean Rozelle and to the Schar School for supporting the work of our Gender and Policy Center and helping us present formats such as we have today. So I'd like to start off by thanking our Gender and Policy Center board member, Ellen Harpel, who is the founder of Smart Incentives and also one of our Schar School doctoral degree graduates, who first brought this book to my attention back in December. And I was pleased after I looked up the book. I was excited about the content. I reached out to the authors, and the rest is history. So we're here today to talk about data feminism. And but before we get started, I just want to let our audience members know that if you have any questions or comments, you can share them in the Q&A section, and we'll have time at the end for some questions, and we may address some in the course of our discussion, depending on how we're going, and we'll finish promptly at 1 p.m. So that's the housekeeping part of things. And now I'd like to start off with Catherine D'Ignazio to get us started explaining the premise of the book and why she believes it's so important for us to pay attention to this issue at this time.
Thank you so much. Thank you to Bonnie, to Dean Rozelle, to the really distinguished panelists who I admire greatly and I'm really honored to be speaking with today. I'm going to really briefly tell you a little bit about data feminism. So I just want to give you just a sense for what it's about, what feminism means for Lauren Klein and I who wrote the book, and a little bit about the structure of the book. So I think the most important thing to say is that it is co-authored, and my co-author is not here. Her name is Lauren Klein, and she is a professor down at Emory University. So sorry, just trying to switch my slide here. There we go. So we see data feminism as part of a growing body of work that is holding corporate and government actors accountable for basically making sexist, racist, and classist data products. So for folks who are on the panel and who are in the audience today, this is probably not a surprise since people are working on these things. But these, to give some examples, are things like face detection systems that cannot see women of color, hiring algorithms that demote women applicants, child abuse detection algorithms that punish poor parents, data visualizations that reinforce the gender binary, and so on. And the idea is that these examples keep coming, right? We keep seeing these surface in the news over and over again. And whereas corporations see data as the new oil, which is what you can see here at the top of the slide, it's a kind of a meme that's been circulating for over 10 years at this point. When what they mean by this is that data seems to them like an untapped natural resource that can lead to profit once it's been processed and refined and cleaned and deployed. In contrast, women, and in particularly women of color, as well as indigenous people, immigrant communities, LGBTQ folks, and more, experience this very same process as a process of data extraction. Because we're talking about oil, the metaphor of extraction is the sort of central metaphor there. And so the way that they experience this is that data is the same old oppression. And in fact, our data-driven systems are accelerating and exacerbating the same oppressions that we have been living with for hundreds of years. And so we're not the first to make the case that this oppression is real, it's ongoing, it's necessary to dismantle. You can see some of the folks that were inspirational for us in writing this book. So really quickly, people like Safiya Noble, Virginia Eubanks, ProPublica, Ruha Benjamin, the Algorithmic Justice League, Maggie Walter, and her book on Indigenous statistics. But when you speak out against the same old oppression, it carries consequences. So I want to encourage everyone here to go read about the case of Dr. Timnit Gebru, who was until recently the head of ethical, or the co-head of ethical artificial intelligence at Google. She's very well known, quite famous, in fact, for her scholarship in machine vision. She's one of the co-founders of Black in AI, a community for Black researchers in artificial intelligence. Google told her to retract a research paper that critiqued Google's own large language processing models. And when she asked why, she was promptly fired. And so colleagues and I have actually written an essay that spells out how this kind of treatment is part of a centuries-old playbook that has been used against Black women when they speak truth to power. But so why does this case matter for AI? Why does it matter for AI policy and ethical policy? And how does it relate? So it relates to feminism as both theory and practice, because feminism demands that we ask what we call in the book, who questions. And so about data science, those are questions like data science by whom, data science for whom, data sets about whom, data science with whose values. But both, Lauren and I, when we talk, we like to give a kind of a level setting of like, what do we mean when we're talking about feminism? So here we start with Beyonce. It's an image from her 2014 tour. So who is a feminist? What is a feminist? It is a person, or he or she is a person who believes in equal rights for men and women and non-binary people. So first, feminism is a belief. Secondly, if you believe in equal rights for all genders, you just look around and you see those are not realized yet in our world. So feminism implies a commitment to action, organized activity on behalf of equal rights for all genders. And then feminism has a third definition, which is very exciting for me and for us, Lauren and I. which is that it's a set of theories and ideas. And these theories and ideas, it's like an intellectual heritage that we can draw from as we face current problems. These theories began by thinking about inequality in relation to sex and gender, but the past 40 years of scholarship and our current political reality have brought many more dimensions of inequality into the conversation. And this is where we get to the heart of our definition of feminism in the year 2021 has to be understood as being intersectional feminism. And so this is a term coined by Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw. She uses this to explain how social inequality cannot be explained by only one dimension of difference. Like if we're talking about sexism, we can't discount the impact of racism or classism or colonialism, particularly when we're talking about people like Black women, for example, that sit at the intersection of multiple axes of domination. And so finally, the takeaway here is that intersectional feminism isn't only about women, and it isn't even only about gender, it's about power, who has it, who doesn't have it. And in today's world, data is power. And we see that in a very concrete way, in the sense of like, which are the companies that are on top right now? They are the companies that are collecting, storing, analyzing, and deploying large stores of data. So the central idea of our book is that intersectional feminism can be applied to data science to help that power be challenged and changed in a positive, sort of liberating direction that uplifts ultimately all of us in the world. And so I think I'll end here on the principles of our book. We developed 7 principles, and this is also how the book is structured. So each chapter of the book talks about one of these principles. It introduces you to some of the feminist thinkers who have developed those thoughts, and connects you to people who are out in the world right now who are embodying those principles in their work with data science. So it's meant as a generative contribution, not to be like data's all bad, technology's all bad. It's meant to be generative and to say, well, what if we approached building technology, regulating technology, and working with technology in this with a different set of values and in a different way that's focused on equity and justice. So,
Thanks so much, Catherine. That really gets us off to a great start and lays the foundation for the rest of our discussion. And we're honored to have with us today Congressman Don Beyer, who, as Mark Rozell said, has been a co-sponsor of the Algorithmic Accountability Act, which is a legislative attempt to deal with potential harms associated with automated decision-making, both individual and collective. So Congressman Beyer, can you welcome and thanks for being here, and please tell us a little bit about that act and what's happening now in that space.
Sure. Well, good afternoon, and thank you, Dr. Stabile and George Mason University for inviting me to participate. And it's great to be here with Dean Rozell, who's not just the dean of the Schar School, but the dean of Virginia Political Analysis and Insight, and it's really, I love, Catherine, learning more about data feminism that I couldn't even spell till a few days ago. So this is really quite interesting. By the way, a number of years ago, I took the Gender Avenger Pledge, where I promised never to be on a panel of 2 or more people that didn't have at least one woman. So it's really fun to be the only man on the panel. So I make it this time, yeah. And the ethical use of data is something I've long been concerned with. My friend Miriam Vogel founded a little nonprofit called Equal AI, which goes to the heart of trying to understand, that it's the old garbage in, garbage out, or history in, history out, or, legacy in, legacy out. And we see it everywhere in our lives, but it's so wonderful to be able to see those 7 principles that I've never could have done myself, and try to figure out how to apply them in our lives. As a business owner, I can tell you that you can't improve, you can't manage what you don't measure. But while algorithms are very efficient, I'm fascinated by machine learning. They are not neutral, and they are as unneutral as their human operators. And we've seen this vast array of harm caused by algorithmic decision-making, from perpetuating the gender pay gap to misidentifying people of color using facial recognition technology, to spreading disinformation through online platforms. These are problems that just beg to be fixed. And this is where I see my role in Congress, trying to aid in this movement wherever I can, wherever my pals can, and many different paths, different goals. My wife is on Gina Davis's board of Women and Girls in Television and Movies. And among the wonderful stories that Gina tells is that since the beginning of like motion pictures 100 years ago, crowd shots are something like 6/7 or 85% men and 15% women. Even to the point when they went into animation, the animation would be 85% men and 15% women, just when they're drawing it. The whole notion of, if this is what you see, then this is what you reproduce. There are different policy solutions. Bonnie talked about the Algorithmic Accountability Act. The lead sponsor is Yvette Clarke. I was privileged to be the #2 sponsor on it. And it fights algorithmic bias by requiring tech companies to audit their AI systems for discrimination, and especially to get away from the black box. Try to make as transparent as possible what the algorithms are so that they can be examined, criticized, improved, and the like. Another bill that we're going to vote on this month in Congress is the 2021 version of the Paycheck Fairness Act, which would add protections to ensure equal pay for equal work. Because as you know, the US has long accepted this cruel reality that women are paid less than men for the equal work. And one of the amendments I had last time, which I certainly will again this time, is that we do the data collection, that every company past a certain size, I hope there'd be a really small size, has to report on a quarterly basis what they're paying for the different job categories, and also with the gender ID in there. So you can actually see how you have, basically, once again, if you don't measure it, you can't manage it. And then also looking at the spread of dis and misinformation on social media platforms. The whole notion, and Megan, you may have a particular interest in this from your Google history, that how the algorithms are often done to maximize emotion, to lead people to things that they know they will click and re-click again, but often in the most nefarious way. So I'm really looking forward to this discussion. I think it's really important, and thank you for inviting me to be part of it.
Well, thanks so much for being here. And now we'll move on to Megan Smith. Megan, we're also honored and so pleased that you're with us today. And I know that you can speak to this with some historical perspective. You've been working these issues for a long time, and since your time in the Obama administration. So I thought maybe you would take us back a few years, tell us some of the evolution of the issues.
Yeah, I think I just put into the chat, and for those who don't have access to the chat, if not, there's a wonderful chart that the Future Privacy Forum folks did around all the different harms, both personal, individual, and societal harms. It's a really amazing summary, and they also have a chart of some of the early mitigations that we have. And Catherine, thank you for your opening, and Congressman Byers for your leadership on legislation, and Jimena, it's great to be with you. And so I really applaud the George Mason team for bringing this up. One of the first things that I just want to say is, I hope everybody listening can take on the confidence that you belong in this conversation as an equal participant. If you're a human, you belong in the artificial intelligence conversation. If you have a face, you belong in the face recognition conversation. And there's really this imbalanced idea, that some of my colleagues in Silicon Valley, which I used to fight against all the time, this arrogance that somehow the tech bros are in charge of all of us. And we love them, and there are many people in the world, and the thing that's interesting, and I really, Catherine, shout out your look in history. I do that too. I mean, it's interesting, just as a prop, I don't know if you recognize this drawing of Ada Lovelace. I love her hair. She looks like Princess Leia, but so this is the first mechanical computer, Charles Babbage, and Ada is the first person to think of what is now computer science and algorithms. And so nobody knows that a woman at the time of Darwin, in the first industrial age, was the person who thought, she even said, I wish to bequeath to the generations a calculus of the nervous system. I think we can figure out the math of the cerebrum, like we figured out, astronomy. So, and she wrote the first algorithms. And so understanding that, and yet she disappeared in history has been a hidden figure is coming back. But if you look at each moment at the industrial ages as they've come, there's always been all of us trying to fight for everybody, and everybody's been innovating at every moment. I'll give you an example from the second one. Jane Addams moved into the Hull House in the middle of industrial age Chicago, second industrial revolution, the American century, all exciting, right? But industry comes through, but Jane was doing data science. She was looking at the wise community in addition to the smart city. And she was looking at what are the wages? What are the livelihoods? Who lives here? And was the person who was doing preschool and sort of all this community organizing of innovation. And at the same time, Ida B. Wells was looking at justice. The original Black Lives Matter data scientist, journalist, Ida B. Wells, who won the Pulitzer Prize last year for her work in the 1880s, looking at the horrific situation with lynching and justice inequality using data. So we have always had, let's call them techies and other disciplines at all moments. Was Charles Dickens' authorship of Oliver, if he were to write today, would he write about the ghost workers who are cleaning data and pornography and all this stuff all over the internet, or cleaning up plastics or recycling this stuff, like all this ghost work that goes with it. So Shift 7, our company, means, if you look at your keyboard, Shift 7 is and we work together. But Catherine, I want to now be part of your 7 principles, because it's really an idea that we can have. We don't have to have a 4th industrial revolution. We can have an industrial, environmental, social, community, inclusive revolution today, just like everyone wanted to in the past. The vice president mentioned Mary McLeod Bethune in her inauguration, who was, in the Black cabinet with FDR and was one of the greatest leaders around inclusion, around education and policy. And so we can even go look at her will and testament, which actually was an agenda for us, that if we just thought about that agenda with data, we would think that way. So the last thing I'll just add is, it's amazing that you brought up Gina Davis, Congressman. I work very closely with her in the past, because I was always looking at how could we automate the measurement of this so that those making media could have some tools to help mitigate their bias. This is actually lines of men to women in 2000 films. And this is children's TV down here. Happens to be Disney, but it could be anyone. And it's this unconscious bias we grow up with that we make. That's not only films, it's your textbook, it's the meetings you're in. And so we need to use AI and machine learning and stuff to help ourselves not do this all day long with each other. We want to hear from the men and the women. And so tonight, Gina is actually receiving the USC Viterbi Innovation, one of the Innovation Awards for the collaborations we all did with Dr. Sri Narayan, who is really, can we use Siri and Alexa-like technologies to solve these problems? And so Jimena, you are doing this work, others are doing the work. Can we get more balance in our actual teams? And can we think of computer science for all, not just all people having these capabilities, and whether it's scripting in Wikipedia to fix the wiki gap of imbalance, 20% women, 80% men profiles, or whether it's actual full coding or product management or all these better, higher paying jobs that are there for us. And can we, most importantly on this call, apply this to solving some of the hardest challenges in the world? We know where every Amazon package is. We know where the vaccines are to the 15 minutes, and we don't know where the children on the border are. And that's because humans who do those things aren't in the same teams, and we haven't prioritized this kind of work. So thank you so much for having this panel. I'm going to put some more links in the chat as we talk.
That's terrific, because in our rehearsal, Megan was putting a lot of links that I learned a lot from last night. I was reading up on, so I welcome our audience to look at them because there's a lot of great resources. So Jimena Hartsock we're also so thrilled that you are joining us. And We've worked a little bit together on the board, and I know we'll be doing some more going forward. But I was hoping for this conversation, you might start off by talking about some of the impacts of the things that our other panelists are talking about, that you've observed and the work that you're doing going forward.
Well, thank you. Well, first impact I'm going to talk about is that the impact my son, my 2-year-old son, had on this computer last night, watching Peppa. So you can't see me very clearly. I'm a little blurry because of that, I think. So I apologize to that. I am actually in Santiago, Chile, where I am from. I took my kid here in December to kind of avoid a little bit of the bad weather and spend time with family. So I am happily joining from very south, and now we're on the same time zone, which is great. Another thing with data, I mean, the impact of data is just so much that we can talk about. I think why this conversation today was so special to me, you know, besides everything that everyone has to say, I think Megan talked about it very well. You know, data is such a used word, and at the same time is so intimidating by many, and it's a word that keeps so many people outside. Why? Because it's normally used to talk about someone else, about something else, and it's normally used by people who've been trained on using data. But the impact of data is in every single minute, every single person in the whole world, and even outside of our world. So talking about the intersectionality is so important. The current company I am working on is a company that is using machine learning and GIS to visualize where are the kids and where are the women. I'm working on a project ages 16 to 45, women who have who are basically outside of every service that we're providing. So I'm looking specifically about technology apprenticeships and how we can bring those technology apprenticeships of these new jobs that sometimes take 6 months to learn in so many areas, cybersecurity, QA, etc., front-end development, to some of these women that are really on a path, the path that we all know, that is a path of poverty, a path of constant, you know, discrimination for them and for their kids. And it's a cycle of poverty they cannot get out of in the current system. And I was inspired to do that by a job I had with Michelle Rhee in 2007. I was assistant superintendent of schools, and she told me, Jimena, please fix summer school, with these words, because she went out on her first round outside as a chancellor, and she was just appalled by the quality of education summer school kids were getting. So I thought, well, what is the purpose of summer school? So I thought, well, number one, we should use it to improve graduation rates, not knowing that the graduation rates of DC were abysmal at the time. I mean, today there are 1.3 million kids that don't graduate, you know, in the whole US. The graduation rate is over 80% now, has improved dramatically. At the time in DC, it was around 54%. So and the kids, and that number increased dramatically in 2 or 3 wards in the city. But nobody, you know, none of us were talking about those things because we were very, very granular, and we didn't know who they were. So in partnership with Accenture, we manually counted the credits of the kids that were in high school. And we saw a large number of kids that were never going to graduate because they were going to age out before they will graduate. So we had the illusion that we'll go from freshman to junior or to sophomore to junior. But when we looked at data, it didn't matter, because with the number of hours that they had in a school remaining, they will never graduate. They will age out. And most of those kids end up later in prison and doing the things we all know. So I thought, this makes no sense. If this is happening here, it's happening everywhere. So we divided the kids up, and we colored them green, yellow, and red. Green on track, yellow at risk, red pretty much already aged out. And so we focused on the kids in yellow and some kids in red, and we did everything for them. We personalized their education. We did after school, summer school, and Saturday school, because the school day wasn't enough to catch up, and we increased dramatically the graduation rates. All you saw in headlines was DC improve graduation rates. So people thought, oh, it's during the school day. So it was very little that anyone else learned from that experience in all the other school districts because it was no context to it. So I thought it was incredible that, we use data to identify a problem and even to fix it, but we didn't use the stories to contextualize the problem and actually learn from it to not repeat it again. So now, I co-founded another tech company. We were very successful. We created an apprenticeship program there. I saw how quickly people can learn these things. Doesn't matter if they even can read or write, they can actually learn coding language. And so I thought, why making those kids that are dropping out wait to drop out? It's a death sentence. Why don't we take them out of a school? If you're 16 years old, you're not going to graduate. Let's give you other tech training and let's put you to work, and you're going to actually make 3 times the minimum wage in 1 year. So this is the new invention I'm working about now, but it's all based on this intersectionality of issues. It's not just being a woman. It's not just being a woman of color. Like I am a woman of color. I was a poor woman, I'm indigenous, I'm all these things, but not that even alone define you as a person, is everything else. So it's so much to talk about here, but I really thank Catherine for writing this book. I thank Megan for her passion and the validity that she brings here to the table. You and the school, Bonnie, for convening us all, and the congressman for actually being able to write policy around it. Because without policy, we're not going to make a difference.
Thanks so much, Amina. So I wanted to bring up another great thing about Catherine's book is that, well, there are a lot of themes that sort of warm the heart of a policy analyst, but one of which is that when you identify the problems, there's this nice section in the back, identifies problems such as racism and patriarchy and the rest, but it also gives metrics, so how do we demonstrate that that's a thing? I often bring up in class, because people that don't want to see this will say, well, that's not a thing and everything seems fine to me, but having data to bring to bear as evidence of the things we're observing. So the things you do in your book by both carefully defining these issues, but then also identifying for people what are the metrics that we can bring to bear on that to demonstrate the problem's existence. And that also starts us down the path of solving the problem. This idea that the congressman brought up about what gets counted counts, that's something we say a lot in our public policy and public administration classroom, trying to get people to be aware of that. So I guess maybe we could talk about some of those things, the classification, moving us from data to solutions would be kind of my next round of questions. And I don't know, Catherine, if you want to start with any particular example there.
Sure. Yeah, I was really encouraged by all the, I'm totally saving the chat, by the way, of this conversation, because I feel like I've just learned about so many different things. And then all of you all in your conversations also brought up these really powerful examples, such as work on the pay gap, such as these ways of quantifying Hollywood screenplays or quantifying media representation. And that is something that we talk about in our book. And in fact, it's something that I'm working on in my own lab at MIT, which is called the Data Plus Feminism Lab, where we're working on exactly this idea of sort of quantifying disparities as a way of defining the problem and then working to reduce the problem. And in the book, we characterize that in chapter 2 as one of the ways to challenge power is to collect counter data. So even collecting data where no data exists, because the powers that be have not deemed it profitable or in some sense worthy of data collection. And in the book, we tell the story of Maria Salguero, who's a Mexican activist who for the past 5 years has been collecting women's murders, feminicides, and putting them on a Google map, to the point now where she has the most comprehensive public archive of feminicide, and she's ended up testifying in front of Mexico's Congress multiple times. She shares her data with NGOs and journalists and so on, and folks who are working on in the space. And it's like in a way, an incredible story. And then in fact, in my lab, we've pursued this. And in fact, there are a lot of these counter data collectors, and across all of Latin America and also in North America as well. There are people who are working to count and quantify gender-based violence in all these ways as a way to combat that. So just to say that, like, I do think that that is a way that we can mobilize data and computation to specifically address the results of these sort of root forces of oppression. So I was appreciating that. I feel like everyone was bringing that up in various different ways. And I do feel that's like a powerful way that data can be used for good.
So Congressman, what information do you think that you need to help advance legislation or thinking on these issues among your constituents that you see?
As with anything that's taken a couple of thousand years to develop, we're going to have to go at it in a lot of different ways. Let me give you so we talked about Yvette Clarke's Algorithmic Accountability Act, which is going to be a good start, and it will require the big tech companies to do deep audits looking specifically for instances of unfair treatment. But let me give you 3 other examples. We've got a facial recognition software bill that would ban it for use in law enforcement. Because, specifically Black men are the ones that we know about, but it's going to affect women too. And when you go to intersectionality, and so this doesn't move us forward, but it keeps us from moving in the wrong direction, using technology to make things worse. A second is the whole notion of moving away from being able to ask about earlier incomes and earlier salaries. There's a movement to just ban this. Because once again, when that happens, inevitably women are trapped into the lower incomes that they made before, and then they just perpetuate. And so you never end up closing the gap. And a third thing, which is interesting, I'm chairing the Joint Economic Committee right now. And one of the things that I've discovered is that women economists have had an enormous difficulty rising up in the profession. There's a whole movement about, why are all the Fed bank presidents and in fact, Joe Biden, by making Cecilia Rouse chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors and adding Heather Boucher, 2 out of 3 are women, which is like, hey, that's never happened before. This is a really good thing. That there will be a necessary intentionality on the part of business and universities and government to elevate women economists. By the way, my middle daughter is a senior front-end web designer. She's a brilliant coder. And when she went through coding school, they tried to put her in a group with a bunch of other men. She's the only woman in the class. And she said, no, because they're just going to use all of my ideas and take credit for it. So they all can have their groups of 5, but I'm going to be by myself because she wanted to be able to show her feminine shine, her woman shine. So.
Sounds like a wise woman.
Bonnie, if I can share one example about what gets counted, I have an interesting, to me at least, example. So last year during Hispanic Heritage Month, I was seeing a lot of these tweets saying, women, we get, less than 3% of venture capital, and Hispanic women, we don't even know. We get like 0.3% or something. And so I started looking the data because in all of the times that we raised funds for my prior company, that narrative, I never felt that helped me because venture capitalists are adverse to risk. So I was trying to show them how many diverse teams were successful. And if you don't get a lot of time with venture capitalists, so you cannot even do that. But as you educate them along the way, it's much easier to tell them, happy stories that tell them, no, we don't get any money, so we don't have any record of success. So I thought, I'm gonna count these companies. And I went on LinkedIn, I went on Twitter, and I asked if anybody knew of any Hispanic tech founder. And people start sending me, a list from Harlem, the Harlem Project that they had done a studies, and Fortune magazine had another study in the Diana project, and people say, oh, my friend, my cousin, my coworker, whatever. Everybody, you know, I got so many messages from people, especially on LinkedIn. So I did with someone else, we did a compilation, and we counted around almost 200 companies that were active, that had raised over $5 billion altogether. And we counted another set of Hispanic founded companies that were also active that exited for over $5.4 billion. And then I looked at the data that said we got around 0.4% of the ventures. So I thought, you know, these numbers don't match. You know, and what happened, I started looking at them, and now I see that their posts, their branding and everything. And I think there's a lot of women that are part of diverse teams. And so they don't get counted when they raise money, and they don't get counted when you talk about Hispanic or whatever color companies. That affects Asian women, Black women, and Hispanic women, and all women really. And so I thought, you know, even with the best intentions, every time that somebody says, we don't get enough money without context, we're really not necessarily telling a venture capitalists to fund us. We're telling them, oh, we don't have a track record. So I think what gets counted, counts is so important in so many ways, but we also have to be careful with the data that goes out there that is sensationalized a narrative, because that narrative we may believe helps us, but in fact, in practice, when you're sitting with an investor, it may actually do the opposite thing.
Yeah, no, that's really important that these questions, sometimes that a lot of times what you were learning about the vast number of these women that people didn't think existed, right, would be called anecdotal evidence, which is another way of dismissing someone's experience and failing to count it, right? And so I think that, you know, perhaps one thing we can do is start to do some of this counting, you know, so that we can demonstrate effectiveness, because otherwise it falls into this narrative that women are less competent or women are less successful at business ventures. I mean, it was only in 2005 when Larry Summers declared women, you know, not to be good mathematical thinkers, and that it had to do with biology. I mean, that sounds like an ancient history story, but it's not that long ago, and it's really distressing to have someone at that stature make such a statement. And so, Megan, what's happening now? Is there a new? Are there going to be a new chief technology officer, or what do you sort of see happening in that space? Because I really think it's important, as we were discussing a little bit yesterday, preparing for the panel, just setting a precedent, at the highest level of government to say this is important, that we pay attention to these issues. So is somebody doing that now?
Yeah, you know, I'm not working in government, but there is like many colleagues are still in there, and much of what we did, you know, continues and grows now. The thing that I would share in that, which is great, and if you saw, Robin Carnahan was just appointed as the new administrator for GSA. So when she comes through confirmation, Robin was somebody I actually recruited who had been Secretary of State of Missouri. She's an incredible leader who has really incredible, like amazing operational experiences at the state level, local levels, and then had come into the actual 18F tech transformation teams at the General Services Administration in the US, centrally working on tech upgrade. And you'd say, you know, this is in the guts of the machine, but think about, I'm going to show you a funny thing. This is a map of the Pony Express. Now, the Pony Express was in 1860 something. President Lincoln upgraded the government to the telegraph, right? So we are an old country, you know, a strong country, and we always are constantly upgrading. And so one of the things that matters a lot on this conversation is that we get a lot of people who are fluent in many different topics working together, because these are some of the harder problems. You know, like I was saying, like if we can drive a car down the street by itself, can't we, you know, work on these policy issues? Can't we figure out school lunch delivery during COVID? Can't we do, that's a big data problem. And, you know, by the way, in school lunch, we actually reach, I think it's 22 million children during the school year, but we only reach like 6 to 8 million kids in the summer or during, like, that's a big data problem. So what I'm sort of getting at is this opportunity to have civic technologists at the table, not somehow, bossing everyone around. Techies can be arrogant, as I said, being peers to others, like a Surgeon General. We don't want all the tech people in our country in the government, just like we don't want all professions in the government. We want some. And when we have zero in the room, we don't speak that language, just like if we didn't have an operator, a communicator, or, a medical person, a scientist. And so we want to have, there's Tech Congress now, which is a way to serve your country, coming in and working with amazing representatives like Representative Beyer. You can go in, and for young people, for the students listening, Coding It Forward was founded. It's like Teach for America kind of program. It's actually a during school internship. We had over 800 kids, I think, last year in census and VA. And, this tech is for anything. And so the fluency matters. And so there's a science advisor, they're working on CTO. The new GSA administrator is somebody who knows about this stuff. Thank you for the relief packages that have come. They include incredible funding for upgrading our systems. Remember all the crashing state systems that for employment and that? We have old mainframes and just crazy old stuff that this is the United States. It's time to get those Americans into these teams, the great government contractors upgraded, so they can all do Agile and really fix this stuff. We're the wealthiest thing in the world, the US feds. And so we can, have the best tech for civic and nonprofit and philanthropic topics. And it matters for this so much. So, I shared a couple things in the chat, but we really need to not only balance our data, and thank you very much for the comment, Congressman, about stopping face recognition. There's this really crazy idea that we ship technologies if they're working for some people, and we'll get to the rest of you later. And actually the NIST database for face recognition was one of the most imbalanced databases. Joy Buolamwini, the founder of the Algorithmic Justice League, called it the pale male data set. And I have two beautiful pale male sons. And I'd love them to be in the data set. And also like Joy. And so they started doing the Parliament test, which was to take Parliament photographs from all continents and run your algorithms against the Iceland and Rwandan and sort of Brazil and Singapore Parliament, the US, the parliaments, and let's see all the faces of humanity. And then we might consider shipping this thing as long as the privacy and other things are there and we're not brutalizing some people while we let other people through. So thank you for that legislation and for that work to make that happen.
So I see we do have a few questions, and given the time, I thought maybe we'd start to look at some questions from our audience. And there's one from a current student of mine who's asking about better representation of women and people of color in data industries, if better representation would help. And I think, the answer to that we would all agree is yes, but the second part of his question is, what are the barriers to entry for these groups and how do we overcome these barriers? So these are the pivotal questions, right? How do we, I think we're pretty well identified some of the barriers, although we could do more there. But that is true. Like if we're going to get to some of the things that Catherine and Lauren aspirationally identify in their book of addressing these problems, everybody's hasn't gotten the memo, right? So, and certainly representation is a huge part of it. So what are we going to do to overcome these barriers?
I have one example, practical example. Technology companies should, in some companies, they don't hire QA, quality analysts, they do just automated QA. And automated QA cannot capture some of these issues that we're talking about. So one very easy thing to do is to hire QA analysts who are people that live in these intersectionalities, to do manual QA. And also QA is something that can be learned in 6 months, 8 months, manual QA. And that is something that, can be brought through apprenticeships in companies. What a beautiful, beautiful project would be for any company to introduce QA to people who were on the path of just making the minimal wage for life. They can solve both problems that we're talking about. So that to me is a very practical thing that companies can do.
I can add just a small piece. I know this is off topic, but it's really on topic, especially looking at Megan's history, in leading in corporate America, is every time I get a proxy vote for board of directors, I abstain on all the men and I vote yes on all the women. And typically you're still finding, I did one yesterday, it was like 11 men and 3 women. It needs to be at least 50-50. And when you get women in the CEO suites and on the boards, you're going to get a lot greater sensitivity to all this stuff.
Yeah, in fact, in Chile, the new constitution that they're writing has parity. They, through all the protests of 2018, I think the people really fought to have a new constitution. They're going to write it in the next 2 years, and now the candidates are out there, but 50% of them have to be women. So it's possible.
That's great. I was going to offer a sort of sassy answer, which is stop firing the Black women, because I do think there's something really symbolic about Dr. Gebru's firing from Google that we need to take note of, because it's symptomatic of a much larger problem that doesn't get as sort of high profile discussed in the news, which is that women and people of color get pushed out of tech. And so we write a little bit about this in the book of it's frustrating when a lot of the research about this frames it as like a pipeline problem, and they throw up their hands and they're like, where are the women? Where are the people of color? When in fact, the question that should be asked is what are the structures and the people in place that are pushing people out? The focus should be on the dominant group, not on what's those women's problem? Where are they? Let's go find those missing women. Because they're leaving for really rational reasons, such as being harassed and not listened to and told they're not good enough and stuff like that. But the other thing I was going to say is that I do think, and we write about this in Data Feminism as well, is that being in higher education, I think education has a huge role to play in this as well, in terms of how do we teach technical subjects, and also how do we teach their application to the real social human world. And in fact, we can teach computer science and software programming and all these things in a really grounded way, and show how they're very connected to improving real lives, improving real communities, and so on and so forth. But a lot of the way that we teach the material is abstract, it's generalized, and the classes are usually led, again, by the pale male faces at the front of the classroom. And so if we can sort of imagine new teaching strategies, and that's kind of another strain of my own work, is around data literacy and inclusive technical pedagogy to bring newcomers into the space. I mean, sort of like Jimena said, it's not that hard. It's not like it's so fancy that kids can't do computer programming, right? But we need different and better pedagogy, and we need that pedagogy led by different people to really bring people in at an earlier stage in the process.
One of the things I would add is there's one of the things I do is it's called Scout and Scale, and everybody is exactly right. And so one of the ways to move a little faster is, instead of having to invent the thing or what should we do about this, you just look up and you're I wonder who is already. So for example, the Muskogee Creek tribe in Oklahoma teaches robotics at Head Start, so that the young people, when they're 3 and 4, once they get to elementary school, not only do they know about tech, but they also are saying words to get tracked to gifted and talented, which was a challenge that they were overcoming. I was on the tech jobs tour that we did. We went to 25 different American cities, like the Music Man right here in River City, to get Americans to meet each other in town. And in Wyoming, they were on the cusp of thinking through computer science across all the classrooms. And we were able to have lunch with the legislative leadership. And that year they have voted in Wyoming, they're the state losing the most population, that they will teach computer science, coding, and computational thinking to all children, kindergarten 12, fully deployed by 2023. And as I was leaving one of the 6th grade Title I classrooms and had been talking about Raspberry Pis, just the board from your phone, and Arduinos, one of the 6th grade teachers said, hey, we're doing that next week. So that the teachers, people are out there, Chicago, last year taught computer science to all children who graduated. They're the first large school district to do that. And it's not that we want everybody to be coders. We want everyone to have freshman biology, because we need to understand natural systems. And so it's about the capabilities of these times. And then I'd share one of my favorite things, which is when you take two problems that are really hard and they can be a solution for each other. This is Grace. She's in 10th grade and she's teaching the police chief in New Orleans how to code. And they're working on data for justice. And so Los Angeles, my friend Jean Home is the deputy mayor and the innovation officer. She happens to be a professor at UCLA in data science. So Catherine, to your point, the curriculum is often, it's not related to what kids know or young people know or that they care about. So what they do is, the challenge in the city is we need more coders, more prototypes and things. So they actually list city problems from the city teams, real stuff that they're dealing with on air quality, or it could be vaccine delivery, any challenges. And then they assign it for homework. Literally in the course, in the schools. There's, I think, 18 schools now in UCLA, USC. And so you're not doing production government software, you're doing a prototype with your friends and you work on your hometown for your homework. And this is real and it's scalable. We have an internet and we could do this all around the country. And it's so fun. And it would matter so much because the kids could tell us, the young people could tell us what they want to work on. And we could solve hard problems in the city with this magical technology.
So Megan, that's really great that you've sort of answered another question in the chat, which is from Lucinda Robb, actually, who's asking what are some resources for young people, very young people, to help inspire them and move them along. And I can say that Lucinda and her co-author wrote a great book, The Suffragist Playbook, which tells young women sort of how to move forward and face the challenges that they need to, using old school things like Megan was telling us, the history of this is not new, right? Women in technology have been around. And to Catherine's point, I know in public administration, we did a study that showed that, they always talk about the pipeline problem. Sometimes that problem doesn't actually exist. So we found that for decades, they've been saying there aren't that many female city managers because it's the pipeline problem, as if you could only be a city manager if you studied it in, the public administration program. But that stopped being true literally decades ago, but we still hear that story. So sometimes the narratives don't match up. But I feel very inspired by all the things that all of you are doing and have told us today. And I think one point that the book makes really well and that you've all supported here is that we don't want everybody to be a technologist, but we want technology to acknowledge everybody. And I think all of the work that you all are doing collectively is helping move us towards that place. And it's a long uphill battle, but I'm really grateful to be in collaboration with all of you on this incredibly important journey. And it's going to take, as Congressman Beyer said, it's been happening for thousands of years. So it's going to take a while to fix this. But we do look in policy to mitigate, and sometimes that doesn't take us as far as we like, but we do have these aspirational visions of what the world should be, and moving forward towards that, I think, can offer us a lot of hope. So thank you so much to all of you for joining us today, and for everybody for being here. And this video will be up and available within the week or so on our Gender and Policy Center website for you to share. All right, take care. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, George Mason.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, George Mason.
Thanks, Bonnie.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.